Hi everyone, Volty here, bringing you my Bloomburrow Set review for 7-Point Highlander. Now it's a cool little set full of some animals. We've got otters, rats and mice, so let's get right into it. Now we're going to start off with the good cards. These are going to be anything that I wouldn't be surprised to play or play against, but I will preface by saying that Bloomburrow is a standard set and hasn't printed anything that's going to dramatically change the format, but there's some cool stuff, so let's have a look. First up is Darkstar Augur. Now, this card is the real deal. A 2/3 flyer is a very real creature. It's a real stat line for attacking planeswalkers, for blocking, and Dark Confidant has obviously been a potent threat against uninteractive decks, so we've got our baseline already for what this card can do. Now, what makes this card so special is the kicker. By paying the offspring cost, you're now forcing your opponent to trade multiple cards in order to regain parity. And if they don't do anything, if your creature is left unchecked, you're threatening to completely bury them with card advantage. Your deck construction is going to have to take this card into effect if you decide to play it. You might have to trim some of the expensive delve threats in favor of cheaper options like Death Shadow, which does pair quite well with the lose life option. It's nothing broken, it's nothing fancy, but it's very well designed and balanced, and I'm pretty excited to try it. Next up, we have Keen-Eyed Curator. Now, this card isn't flashy. It's not going to win games by itself. It's not going to warp any matchups. It's not going to rise in popularity and go to $50 like Scavenging Ooze did. However, I think it's really good. It's obviously comparable to Scavenging Ooze. It's a bit harder to cast, it doesn't offer you any life gain, and the size of the creature is capped. However, it starts off bigger, and there are some notable shocks in the format, and the colorless cost of the activated ability is way better than paying green. It can't really be understated just how important it is that your bad lands can exile a card from a graveyard. Importantly as well, this raccoon gets trample, which is a really big deal. One of the biggest issues that Scavenging has is that it gets massive, and your opponent just chump blocks it for a couple of turns before they remove it. Keen-Eyed Curator gets rid of that problem. It shouldn't be too difficult to make it a 7/7. You probably won't be rushing to grow it to that size, obviously. You'll be using its ability to interrupt your opponent, but at some point it's going to become quite large and threaten to end the game. Now, Shoreline Looter is up next. It's very, very similar to Suspicious Stowaway, to Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. It's just one of the new Looter cores that we've seen printed. Threshold is a lot easier to reach than turning the game into nighttime, or keeping it nighttime, or being able to connect 4 times, which is what Malcolm has to do. So hitting Threshold, super easy. As you attack with it and loot, you're filling up a graveyard. As you continue playing the game, you're filling up a graveyard. And suddenly this is a real creature that has to warrant a removal spell, or, a ping effect, which you might be able to interrupt with counter magic. Dewdrop Cure. Now, this card is one of my favorites in the set. This card is incredible. I've played it in Limited at a pre-release, and it performed there, and I imagine it's only going to do disgusting things in Constructed. Now, imagine a scenario where you're playing a white creature deck. You play a bunch of 2-drops naturally. You're going to be playing Stoneforge Mystic, you're going to be playing Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, you're going to be playing Mother of Runes and or Giver of Runes. At some point, those creatures are going to die, and you're going to have traded some resources. Maybe your opponent is getting a bit low on cards, maybe you're getting a bit low on cards, and you can slam a Dewdrop Cure. Now, if you gift them a card, you get 3 creatures back. That's 6 mana. Usually it's going to be 4.5 to 5 mana, but sometimes it's going to be full 6 mana. As long as the 3rd creature you reanimate is worth more than a card in, like a random card in your opponent's hand, then gifting is going to be the right play. If it's not, or if you just have to run this out because you need to pick up something that's important and you're just reanimating 2 things, then the gifter card doesn't come up, and that's perfectly fine. I think it's going to show up in a lot of sideboards. I think it's going to be very good in those sideboards, and I wouldn't be surprised if the gift a card mechanic actually becomes a thing that we have to think about. Next up is Nettleguard. This card is really boring, but it could be worse. If you're playing a Cathar Commando, you should keep playing your Cathar Commando because it is better. If you need 2 Cathar Commandos, you now have it. You couldn't before. You'd have to play something different, like Lauren of the Third Path, or any of the other, if you're playing a different color, like green, there are a bunch of different options you could use to blow up artifacts and enchantments. But if you're mono white, or if you're not in any of those other colors that can disenchant, you now have a second Cathar's Commando. Growing its toughness with an equip activation, or a Mother of Runes activation, or any kind of pump effect, for example, it's not going to come up very often, and it's not going to matter very often. But it's a free roll. You're paying for a Cathar Commando. If you need 2 of that card, you've got it. So if this shows up, that'll be why. Okay, Paw Patch Recruit is the last card in our good category. Now, this is a really strange card, and I went back and forth on where to put it. It doesn't have a home. There isn't a green aggressive deck that wants Savannah Lions or a critical mass of good Savannah Lions. However, this is one of the best Savannah Lions we've seen in a very long time. This card has so much text. It has Trample, which is incredible when your creatures are getting bigger. It has Offspring, which means it's not only a 1-drop, it's a 3-drop as well. So if you draw it off the top and you're a little bit flooded or you're running out of gas, you've got 2 threats now. And if you do pay the Offspring, the counters that you're getting as your opponent cleans up your creatures are going to scale out of control. Speaking of scale, if you have any synergy with putting 1/1 counters on your creatures, Winding Constrictor, Hardened Scales, for example, this card becomes nuts. This card becomes completely insane, and your opponent isn't going to be able to deal with all of the stuff that you're doing. One thing that is very notable, which is a downside of the card, is that even if you pay the Offspring cost, even if you have 2 copies of this card, it's not safe from pings. So Wrenn and 6 Orcish Bowmasters, for example, they can still ping your X1s. They can only ping one of them, but that is important. The creatures don't get counters on themselves, which is obviously good when they're being removed, but it's bad when you're trying to grow them out of removal spell range. Alright, so we're going to move on to the cards that I've labelled bait, for lack of a better term. I think at the start of the format, a lot of these cards are going to be overplayed. Whether or not that remains the case going into the future is kind of up to the community to see if they can figure these out. But I'm fairly confident in putting all of the cards that I've put from Bloomburrow into this category. I think most of them are just kind of medium, if not actively bad. Hopefully, watching this video will give you an edge against the players who are playing these cards. So we're going to start off with 3 Tree City. Now this is the big new Nixos / Unclaimed Territory / Cavern of Souls creature land. It's the creature tribal land that isn't a good land. There are a couple of things that are of note. One, it doesn't tap for rainbow like any of the other creature typal lands. Cavern of Souls taps for any color. Unclaimed Territory taps for any color. This taps for colorless. That is a huge deal. Part 2, going big and making lots of mana requires at least 4 creatures. If you have 3 creatures of the same type, and you tap 2 lands and this, you get 3 mana back. So it's exactly the same as any other land. So you need to have at least 4 creatures to be mana positive. And then you get to make 4 mana of 1 single color. It does not grant any effect to the creatures you play of that type. They don't scry, they don't have uncounterable, they don't come into play with 1/1 counters. This card is completely atrocious. Don't play it. Don't buy it. Every time you open one in the first couple of weeks, sell it to a Commander player as soon as you can. and you can thank me later. Wishing Well is up next. Now, on the surface, this card is really cool. It's really flashy. You build up a resource over time on a relatively difficult to interact with permanent, and you can cast free spells. Who doesn't love casting free spells? This card is just terrible. There are so many different issues with it. You can't cast spells that cost less than the number of coin counters. You can't cast spells at instant speed. It's just terrible. This card takes so long to pay off that Duskmourn's going to be out by the time you get your mana back. Don't play it. Okay, this one's a bit controversial. Stormcatch Mentor, on paper, looks good. It has haste, it gets really big, you can discount your instants and sorceries so that it can keep getting bigger. So why is it bad? Basically, it's worse than the sum of all of its parts and worse than every other option available. If your deck cares about a hasty prowess creature that gets big, you're going to have better options. You have Monastery Swiftspear. You have creatures that have evasion, like Elusive Otter and Sprite Dragon. If your deck cares about the Medallion mode and making your spells cheaper, you again don't want this card. You don't care that your creature gets big, you don't care about the combat aspect of it because you're going to be playing lots of spells per turn. So even if you want a Medallion effect, you have Goblin Electromancer and you have Baral Chief of Compliance, both of which are way harder to kill than a 1/1. Rotten Mouth Viper. Now, this was reviewed pretty early on during spoiler season as having quite a lot of potential. I personally don't see it. It asks a lot of you. It gives you almost nothing back. It's just, I'm not 100% convinced that it doesn't have a home somewhere. I just don't know where that would be, and I don't know what the payoff would be. Don't play this card. I'm almost 100% sure it's garbage. Dawn's Truce, it's like Teferi's Protection. Now you can play 2 Teferi's Protections. They have a lot in common. The cards are designed so they have a lot in common. And the biggest common denominator is that these cards are completely unplayable. And they're both unplayable. So just don't. Alright, we have Eddie Mertcrab. This card is a bit weird. So it's quite similar to both Tolarian Terror and Sailor's Bane, and a couple of other options where it's like a big blue creature that costs a lot, but doesn't actually cost a lot. Part 1, it has Flash. Flash is a big deal. Flash makes it much harder to interrupt. You can squeeze it in when your opponent has tapped low, and you can start cracking in with it. However, onto the downsides. It can't ever cost a single mana. Tolarian Terror can cost single blue, and double blue is a huge difference. All of the other creatures of this nature have either evasion, or ward, or trample, or just kind of really big. And this doesn't have any of that. The tap ability is really good, the fact that it has Flash is really good, but you have to be careful to eat your graveyard with Murktide Regent because it doesn't check exile like Sailor's Bane. I'm confident to say this card is garbage. Next we have Storm Splitter. It's kind of like that Ooze Storm card. It's kind of like a lot of different cards. It's a new Storm, but not Storm win condition, except it's an Otter. That doesn't make it good enough. There are lots of other options. Just play good cards. This card sucks. Storm Chaser's talent. I've heard a little bit of talk about this. It's a prowess creature that triggers prowess, which is kind of cool. That's about it. You're almost never going to spend 4 mana to draw a card and pick something up from a graveyard. You're almost never going to be able to spend 10 mana to turn this into this big, stupid Shark Typhoon enchantment that makes a lot of crap and a lot of creatures. It's not good. Don't play it. Okay, this one might also be controversial. Thundertrap Trainer is very much like Augur Bolus, and it is better in almost every way. I will not argue that. It isn't limited to instants and sorceries, so you can pick up artifacts and planeswalkers, for example. It looks 4 cards deep rather than 3, that's a big deal, and it has a kicker. So if you have 6 mana, or if you have, 8 or 9 mana more accurately, then you can go ham and draw some cards. That's really cool. That's it. That's where it ends. The card's not good. Augur of Bolas isn't good. It's barely good in Pauper. This card isn't legal in Pauper, so I don't expect it to see any play in any format that isn't standard, and I think that's going to be cutting it close to. I'm not sure about Fireglass Mentor. This card looks kind of cool. It draws cards for a pretty low cost. The issue is you don't have enough time to play the cards, because it's only 1 turn rather than 2. And it's a 2-1 for 2, which is just not a good stat line. So I'm fairly confident this card is never going to see play, but the fact that you can play it and the card draw effect has haste, because you can play it in your pre-combat, crack in, and draw a card, that's cool, but I don't think it's good enough. Fade the Cycle. It's strictly better than Hero's Downfall. That's the first thing I heard about this. I looked it up. I looked at the card. This card's terrible. I don't know why people are talking about it. If you forage 3, well, if you forage and exile 3 cards from a graveyard, this is like a murderous cut that you've delved 3 for, and it can hit planeswalkers. Murderous Cut is so far away from being playable in Highlander, in most formats, actually. And if you pay 1 black, you're playing Hero's Downfall. That card got downshifted and it's been okay in limited sometimes, because it's murder. I don't expect anyone to be able to sacrifice food to it to make this good, and it's cheap, it's dirty. Just play a different removal spell that's maybe a bit harder to cast or a bit more conditional, because it won't ask as much of you. Long River's Pull, I saw some chatter about this. It's like an Essence Capture or an Essence Scatter, and it has a backup mode where you can counter anything if you need to and give them a card. It's not good enough. If you need a 5th or 6th or 7th counter spell in your deck for some reason, just play like a Mana Leak or a Logic Knot or a Remand. All of those are better than this card. Alright, last category. This is going to be my pick for sleepers of the set. Some of these cards might be good enough. I might be wrong on most of these. I'm probably wrong on a lot of these. But I wouldn't be that surprised to see any of these see some amount of play, and I would love if they saw play. A lot of these cards are really cool. So fingers crossed. I'm going to try to make some of these work. We'll see what happens. Starting off with Glob. Glob, Calamity's Augur. I love this card. This card is my newest crush. She does so much, and she asks almost nothing of you. She has Death Touch, so she's very good in combat. She can block anything. For a 3-drop card draw engine, to have Death Touch and be relevant in combat is pretty rare. You can play lands off the top of your library. We've had Courser of Crucifix, we've had Augur of Autumn, we've had a couple of different effects like this. All of those creatures were bad in combat. This one isn't. On top of being able to play lands, you can cast big spells from the top of your library. Now, obviously, if you're paying 4 mana turn by turn to play a card off the top, that's good, you're drawing a card, but that's not what you're looking for ideally. However, if you're casting cards from the top of your library for free, now we're talking. Grief works. Subtlety works. We have a couple of different effects that are similar to Evoke. Delve, for example, you can cast a Gurmag Angler off the top for 1 mana. That works. Now we're cooking. You can start drawing lots of cards. You still get your draw steps, unlike some of these effects. And to top it all off, she has the ability to fix your draws. On top of everything else, she also fixes your draws, and because it's Surveil, not Scry, you can get all kinds of value. You can bin something that you can reanimate, you can bin something that has escape, like Cling to Dusk or Uro, and you can activate it at all kinds of times. So you can activate it end of turn, see 2 bricks, the board state's changed, you can activate it in upkeep, and you can have another 2 looks, and you can see if you can find what you're looking for. This card's great. I'm in love with this card. And there'll probably be an article on the website soon with a deck built around it. Next up is the infamous Cruel Claw. This card's kind of weird. It's really, really powerful, and it has the potential to end the game immediately. But you can't cast it off Mana Crypt. It has to connect. It's not an attack trigger. You have to actually hit them with it. So if they have 2 blockers... But if you can get 1 trigger, you're probably in a good spot. If you can get 2 triggers, the game's over. So I wouldn't be surprised if people can pull this off. It's asking a little much, but we'll see. Kitsa, Audible Elite. This card is a perfect little guy. It doesn't do anything super broken. It's not going to be super powerful. It's not going to swing a game by itself. You're probably never going to activate its last ability. You're probably not going to copy something that often. Maybe you will, and that'll be good. But it will always do something. It has prowess, so it's very good in combat. It has vigilance, so you can threaten prowess in your turn, crack in, maybe get in for 1 or 2 if you played a cantrip. And then when they try to attack you, you have your prowess blocker. It has a loot. Loots are good. We love loots. And every now and then you'll cast a cantrip and a bauble, and then you'll play a gush or a big draw spell like a brainstorm, and then you'll copy it, and that'll be good. It's not going to come up very often because it is a 2-drop 1/3. It's quite easy to kill, but if it ever does come up, this card's sweet. I have no idea if it's good, but it's so sweet. Alright, we have Ren the Relentless. This card is basically different to Kalidas, but not really. It's blue, so it pitches to force. That's a good deal. The rat tokens you make get a lot bigger than zombie tokens ever will. It doesn't have lifelink, but it does have ward. I have no idea if this card is good. If Kalidas is in your sideboard at the moment and you're playing blue, maybe give this a try. Might be good. Artist talent, so the medallion text costs 5 to get to. That is not good. That's very bad. If you play it on 2 and the medallion on 3, you've done nothing for 2 turns, and you're probably dead. The rummage text on the upfront is probably quite good. Rummaging and discarding a card and drawing a card is going to be better than Surveil 1, which is what Dragon Rage Channeler, it's what Darcy has. So I'm not convinced this card will be good. I wouldn't be surprised if it's good, or if it slots in somewhere. I'm hoping it does because it's quite cool, and the fact that it has 2 extra modes that you can buy into later is not nothing. We'll see. Alright, Clifftop Lookout. Not much to say about this other than it's a pretty meaningful upgrade on some of the other effects of this nature. Elvish Rejuvenator can miss. You do get optionality, so if you see 2 lands with Rejuvenator, you can pick which one you want. This doesn't do that. It always gives you the first land that you're going to hit, but it's always going to give you a land. It comes into play tapped, which is worse than Wood Elves, which puts into play untapped. So if you play Wood Elves on a turn that isn't turn 3, you can use the extra mana. It's going to be quite good. However, it has Reach. Reach is a really big deal when you're playing a creature that's essentially a chump blocker. It's a spell that blocks, like Sakura Tribelter. Reach means you can block a big Murktide Regent, which none of the other effects can do. It also has 2 toughness. The extra point of toughness from 1 to 2 is the biggest extra point on the entire scale. There are a lot of ping effects in Highlander right now. This dodges all of them. So if you're looking for a Wood Elves / Elvish Rejuvenator, I would say give this card a shot. If you don't care about the Elf tag, if you don't care about the Forest tag, or you're not playing 30 lands, so Rejuvenator's always going to hit, this card might be good enough. Alright, next up we have Gev. There's really not much to say about this card. It's probably just bad. However, there's just enough going for it that I'm okay with putting it in the potential category. There's no playable lizards. Well, there's some, but there's not enough for it to matter. And the second ability, where you put counters for Bloodthirst, or your creatures that get Bloodthirst, is really bad with haste creatures. So we're starting off strong. However, it's a 2-mana 3/2 that has Ward for pay 2 life. So if they kill it, it domes them for 2. So it almost has haste. And if you're playing at a slower pace and you don't have as many hasty creatures, the Bloodthirst ability is pretty good. Like, it's an extra counter on your 2-mana 3/2 Ward 2. It's not the worst thing in the world. I don't think there are going to be enough lizards for this to come up ever, but if it does, it's a freebie. I don't think it's good enough. If it shows up somewhere, I wouldn't be that surprised if it's just a curve filler. Alright, we have Paw Patch Formation. This is easily the most boring card in today's review. There are a couple of notes on why this is slightly different to some of the previous iterations. It can't hit artifacts, that's 1. It can't hit Merit Lage, that's 2. But unlike Pick Your Poison or some of the other variants, you can choose the target. So if they have a 1/1, or if they have a Fairy Mastermind and a Murktide Regent, you can kill the Murktide Regent. That's a pretty big deal. The last line, draw a card, create a food token. It's cycling for 2, but it's better. If you care about the artifact, if you're playing blue-green and you care about the artifact, it might be the last sideboard slot in your deck. It might not. I think Pick Your Poison is still better, but we'll see. Alright, we have Polywog Prodigy. This is a commander card. It looks like a random blue idiot frog. It kind of just looks like a do-nothing. But I think it might actually be good. This is a really powerful semi-hate bear that you can play in your sideboard of a blue deck. If your opponent plays a Bauble, you draw a card. If you grow it once with a Fairy Mastermind or any kind of 2/1, you get to draw cards off every cantrip. You get to draw a card when they try to kill it. It's possible that it's not going to do enough, and I really wish it was white. If it was in white, this card would be way better. But we're here, we have this random blue critter. It might see a bit of play out of the sideboard. Fingers crossed. I like frogs. I'm a frog girl. What are you going to do? Second to last, we have Zoraline Cosmos Caller. I am 98% sure this card is not good enough. I don't think this card is playable in Highlander. But it's a bat, and look at her face. She's just this goofy little smiling bat. I love the art. I love the flavor. I love the card design. I'm going to try to make this work. I hope someone else tries with me. If they figure it out, that's good. If I figure it out, that's good. If it's unplayable, I'm not going to be surprised. Fingers crossed for Zoraline. She's just a little guy. Like, we'll see. Alright, lastly, we have Flubs the Fool. Now, I really didn't want to include this in the review because I don't think this card is playable in any sense. I don't even think it's bait. However, if I don't put it in the review and someone breaks it, I'm going to look like an idiot. I'm going to be Flubs the Fool. So, we've seen effects like this before. We've got Song of Creation. It works with... It's probably a 7-card combo that draws your deck and does something cool. If that's good enough, sure. It's in good colors. Tamer is good colors. It gives you cantrips. It gives you fast bond. There's some potential here. It's a 3 mana 0/5. It's quite hard to kill. It does get hit by both red and blue blasts, so it's not ideal. And it's this weird janky frog card, but if it does something cool and someone spikes a weekly with it with 11 players, I'm not going to be that surprised. I mean, weird cards go off in Highlander all the time, so good luck, Flubs. And that's it. That's my set review for Bloomburrow. There are a lot of other cards in the set. If your favorite card from the set hasn't been mentioned, it's probably just because I don't think it's good enough at all and it didn't fit into any of the categories. There really wasn't much else. I looked through the Commander set, I looked through the regular set. I don't think there's anything else that's going to make it out, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that's okay. If you enjoyed this, please leave a comment with your favorite animal friend from the set. There's so many to choose from. I know a lot of frog girls. I know a lot of people who are enjoying the otters, mice and rats. All great. But otherwise, leave a comment if you like, leave a like if you can, and I'll see you next time.